don't believe that capitalism itself is hugely problematic. Is unbridled capitalism in an area that is a human right problematic? Yes. And I think that's what differentiates housing as a commodity from gold as a commodity. Gold is not a human right. Housing is.
This building, this whole complex has 1,700.
1,700. Wow.
Yeah, 1,700 units.
Wow.
The previous landlords, I think it was CNC. I think they did put information up to let us know that the complex was going to be sold.
Right.
But this is before Fairfield came in.
Do you know who is Fairfield? I don't know who they are.
From what I'm told, Fairfield is a subsidiary of is it Blackstone?
Right, private equity firm.
Yes, exactly. They want to raise each apartment, they rent up to like $900 each. That is
By $900 each.
By $900.
And are you going to be able to pay that?
I don't know. I mean, I can definitely say next year there's no way. And where I'm going to go, I don't have a clue. I don't know.
Push, and well, as you saw, this was a clip from Push, and we visited this guy in Harlem, New York, who was like he was living in this 1,700 unit building, and he needed to make $100,000 a year to pay the rent. It was like, I don't make $100,000 a year, so it's totally insane. And it wasn't even, a fancy place. It was a project in Harlem. So there is something really crazy going on out there. And of course, as always, with me, Leilani Farha in her bunker in Ottawa. Good morning.
Still in my bunker. Good morning.
So,
good afternoon.
You're now with a new title.
This is true.
You lost your UN hat.
Yep.
And now you're the global director of The Shift. And if you've seen the film Push, we are there when it happens, when the shift is born. But actually, now when you left the UN, now it's really kicking off. So tell me, are you now really lazy as your new private life, or what's happening?
I wish I was lazy, I have to say. It's gone from busy to busy. It's, there's a lot of need right now. Housing is such a huge issue, not just in COVID, but of course in the time of COVID. So no, things are still super busy, unfortunately, or fortunately. There's a lot of work to do. So got to get to it.
You got to get to it. And so we are now we will have a little talk here as we now getting used to it. This is the fourth pushback talk. Pushback talk. It means that push actually meant people being pushed out of cities, but push is a movement, you can also push back.
Yep.
And that's what we are in. We really want to push back. And friends out there, you can share this video with your friends. You can send us hearts. We love hearts, so please push the hearts. We are like easygoing, sentimental people. So we love love, basically. So send hearts. You can also send questions. You can also send questions, and you can also send positive notes. We got here from Truls in Norway, a film with a great committed woman. I mean, he don't know how tall you are. I mean, but anyway,
or how tall I'm not.
It's fine. But thank you, Truls. It's nice to get feedback, and you are a great person anyway, even if you're short. So it's good. That's from me to you.
Thanks so much.
Last time we talked, you were just about to file almost last communication as the UN Special Rapporteur.
That's right.
And you filed that towards a company based in Bahamas, and I think also Cyprus, that owns homes in 7 countries.
Lots
And
of them.
Sorry?
They own lots of homes in
Many
7
homes.
countries. Yeah.
And the company is called Akelius. So it's actually the founder is a Swedish tax lawyer. He was like really famous in the 80s by helping rich people to pay less taxes. And he's like extremely creative and good at avoiding paying taxes. And as a lot of people from the 80s, they turned into be big finance. They were like, they moved into this kind of finance sector, selling and buying financial products. And now we found out, that's the part of the story from Push, that the financial guys, the Wall Street boys, are now suddenly owners of ordinary people's homes, which has a lot of complications. So tell me, what did you say about Akelius?
Yeah. So first of all, that's super interesting. I didn't know that background on the owner of Akelius. So that's very interesting. And just another piece of the, it's like a puzzle, all of this stuff. So that's another important piece, I think. So yeah, the last thing I did as rapporteur, one of the last things I did was to file what we call a communication. And it's like a legal letter. And it was just saying to Akelius and to 3 governments who have invited Akelius in. So the government of the UK, the government of Germany, and the government of Canada. So I was expressing concern because I'd heard about Akelius's business model as really being horrible for tenants. In particular, my concern is around the affordability issue. So the model goes like this. Akelius has its eye on apartment buildings, multi-units in city centers that maybe are a little run down. And they move in, they buy them, and then they say, well, these buildings are run down. We really need to modernize them. That's the language they use. By modernize, they mean really convert them into luxury units because they're in city centers, so it's prime real estate. And to do that, they engage in renovations. Those renovations often themselves are problematic and drive people out. But ultimately, it's a way to get around the law and raise up rents. So if you as a property owner, if you upgrade your properties, you can generally get around caps on rents. And so then they raise the rents way up and people can't afford them. And so obviously it changes the nature of who's able to live in those buildings. Hugely problematic from a human rights point of view, because affordability is an element of the right to housing. So I just wrote a letter saying I'm concerned, as I should as rapporteur at the time. And I wrote to the governments to say, hey, what are you doing? Do you know this is happening in your backyard? You've allowed this to happen. What are you doing to control it? We have to wait 60 days before they respond. So there's been no official response from any government or no official response from Akelius.
Okay. So when I posted this story on my Facebook, because it was also in the Swedish press, a Facebook friend, I would say, posted, is it really a human right to live in the inner city at a low rent? I mean, he was like, oh, can you please stop talking about human rights? It's so boring, It's not a human right to live in the center of the city with a low rent. So what is this?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot.
Did the UN really mean that when they were writing this Declaration of Human Rights?
Yeah. Well, what the UN definitely did mean is that when you're living somewhere and you're able to live there and you're affording your rent, you can't be kicked out or you can't be pushed out. And that is a human right. And it may be boring to someone who doesn't have that experience, but for the person living it, it's not boring at all, right? It's life-changing and it's huge stress and causes anxiety, can lead to homelessness. So it's really super serious. Yeah. And so you know, I have never argued everyone has the right to live exactly where they want to live, you know, in city center at a really cheap rent. But one thing we do know is we need cities to work. And for cities to work, the people who service cities, who make cities work, have to be able to live there. And housing does have to be affordable under international human rights law standards. And people can't be evicted and forced out of their homes, pushed out of their homes.
Yeah.
So,
And this, what they claim in when they sell themselves, is that they're building the Teslas of the city, you know, like the luxury apartments of the cities. And here in my town, Achilles are also quite big, and it's not at all true that they're building any Teslas here. It's just really shitty renovations. They do exactly what they need to do to be able to push up the rent.
yeah.
This is not a model unique for Achilles. We have here in our town a company owned by a Norwegian financial guy. It's called Heimstaden.
Oh,
They're quite big. And sorry, I have to drink some water. They suddenly, remember we were in Czech Republic, we found out that Heimstaden had bought 44,000 homes in the Czech Republic.
Right. Yeah. I do remember
the story?
Yes, I do. And I don't know if you remember, but in Stockholm, wasn't it? I visited one of those homes that had been renovated by Heimstaden. And I mean, the people were complaining. One woman told me, I remember, she told me.
It was not. Anyway, you're remembering wrong.
Oh, I am?
But it's okay. So I will
Who
turn
was
you
it?
back.
It was a big company though, also.
Now the story is like this. So this Heimstaden bought in the Czech Republic 44,000 apartments, and they bought them from a company called Blackstone, which is also a big hedge fund. The same big hedge fund, Blackstone, sold everything in Sweden to a German company called Vonovia.
Oh, yes.
So you were actually in a former Blackstone building, and in the building you were out in Husby, Stockholm, where that building had 5 owners in 10 years.
Yeah.
Now the Germans were the last one. And this German company didn't own a single apartment in Sweden 1 year ago, and now they're one of the biggest landlords.
Right.
So if we talk about companies like Achilles, Heimstaden, Blackstone, and all these, you can take maybe a picture, boom, this is what they are today. Tomorrow they will be something else, because they're constantly in the move. I actually was checking some news about Blackstone, and the CEO of Blackstone, Steven Schwartzman, a very good friend of Donald Trump, he said that they are now sitting on a lot of dry powder.
Yes.
160 million dry powder. 160 billion US dollar dry powder. So do you have any idea what I mean with dry powder?
I had to look up the term. It means basically money that's sitting there, that's ready to be invested, basically. I didn't know what it meant. I saw that quote too. So what the heck is dry powder? But the term, I love the term dry powder, because it gives you some sense of, it's like a whole other world that they're creating. I immediately thought of gunpowder, but that's it. They're sitting on money. They know right now, especially with this COVID time and everyone suffering so much economically worldwide, that this is an opportunity for assets to become distressed or cheap, for there to be cheap debt that they can buy and then make profits off of. And I like what you said, Fredrik, about, you know, it could be one company today, another company tomorrow. Part of what I want to challenge is the whole model. I don't care who's implementing the model, whether it's Vonovia or Blackstone or Achilles, they're all implementing the same model. And that model is one that doesn't value housing as home and doesn't value housing as a place for everyday people to live, right? They don't care. I mean, housing is simply, for them, part of their financial instruments. It's an instrument.
But tell me about your Achilles. It's been a lot in Canadian press, in British press, in Swedish press, in also German press. So have there been any reactions from tenants around
I'm super surprised, actually. I haven't seen UK press, but so in the Canadian press, it's been quite a story. It was on the national news. It's not easy to get on the national news with anything about housing, and tenants are speaking up, standing up, and saying yes. In fact, yesterday I saw a member of city council, I think, standing up and saying these Achilles is a problem. Everyone knows they're a problem. Seeing the same thing in Germany, tenants really saying, yes, we identify with what's being reported, and what Leilani said in her press release, because I issued a press release about this. What I'm interested to say to you, Fredrik, and maybe you can explain it, is I while there's been a little bit of interest from journalists in Sweden, I haven't heard from any Swedish tenants. So why would that be? Are they treated differently? Are they treated better by Achilles? No.
It's interesting because I meet a lot of people who live in Achilles houses, and I also been interviewed by journalists who live in Achilles houses, and they're really frustrated, and they have exactly the same stories that you've heard from Canada, from Brooklyn, from all the other, from France, where they are active. And I think maybe the thing is that you might think that you have a lousy property manager. You think you have some bad luck, and so people, I think what the good thing what you are doing, and also of course what we did with Push, is that we all have to understand you don't have a bad property manager in your house. What happens to you is a part of a global business model. So when you do this communication and you connect all these people, I mean, I saw there was also Achilles tenants in France formatting a group, on Facebook. Okay. So there is obviously the same kind of reactions around. There is also groups around Vonovia and Blackstone and so on. So of course, so when tenants start to talk to each other in different countries, you can see that the same shit is happening everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's super important.
It's all about finding a way to push up the value of the house. Because what Achilles is doing is they are going to big funds, pension funds, other kind of funds, and they say, we will let your money grow. Please come to us. So it's all about, their clients are not the tenants, their clients are the investors.
Yeah.
So they're selling growth. And the only way to make this, to create growth, is to push up the rents.
It's absolutely right.
Whenever they buy a house, it's all about pushing up the rent. And of course, they don't want to spend too much money pushing up the rent. So when they say it's going to be a luxury building from now on, it's probably not true. It will be a mediocre building with a much higher rent. That's right. That's basically the point.
I think that's right. And I think there's two things you said that are super important. One is, a lot of people have crappy landlords. Okay. I mean, a lot of housing providers are not great. That's a problem, but it's not the problem I'm trying to identify here. I'm trying to identify that there is, as you said, a global business model that is structural. It's being supported by governments around the world through a variety of tax laws and other legislation, and lack of legislation that protects tenants. And that's the issue. The issue isn't, oh, well, I also have a crappy landlord. Yes, that needs to be dealt with as well. But when we're talking about changing systems so that they work better, this is actually a system that's in place. And the second thing is about profits. Some of the big actors like Blackstone and Achilles will say, well, we're actually here for the long term. We're looking at this longer term, than we're not just coming in and coming out. But when I look at their annual reports and what they're telling their shareholders, they say, we expect to have 8 to 10% return in the short term and 15-20% in the longer term. But 8 to 10% return in the short term is a high return for housing. You have to increase rents to get that return. So it's still too much, and it's too much for tenants to bear. And as you say, you're not even getting good quality housing. You're getting mediocre housing for inflated costs, for sure.
So there's a lot to do for this shift, I guess. So to all of you who are just coming into this little show, this is Leilani Farha, and I'm Fredrik Gertten, and we're talking about housing as a human right. Sounds extremely boring, but it's actually still, it's about our lives. It's about our homes, and we all need a home. I actually got a very nice little letter from a friend here saying that, you know, if we don't have much money, we can try to live cheap. We can buy carrots and onion, and, you know, we can make a small soup.
Yeah.
We can borrow clothes from friends. We can get the furniture almost for free. You know, we can have a bike. We can bike around. So we can really live low cost, but we all need a house.
That's right.
And if we can't buy a house, it's very difficult. And of course, you can try to live more people in a house. So if you live like 7 people in a 2-bedroom, well, then you probably will have a problem with your bathroom because it will be too damp. You will have you will wear down the house in some way. So it's not an easy solution. Actually, here in the newspaper here in Malmö, there is a new project coming in, and again, it was a company called Aberdeen something. It's like a British company, and they present themselves as a real estate investment trust.
Yeah.
So it's basically, again, you know, somebody who goes out to the market and asks for investors because they have a big project, and this big project is to build what they call low-cost housing around the world. So people don't even know what city. So here in Malmö, they're building a 450-unit building, and the apartments are 18 square meters.
Teeny.
18 square meters. So who do you think will
Smaller than a hotel room.
It's smaller than your average, and we know about small hotel rooms, and I tell you, it's no fun. 18 square meters.
Yeah.
And this is like the solution for what?
Crazy.
Is this the way we should go? How do you
Totally
see that?
crazy. Well, whenever I hear stories like that, 450 units at 18 square meters, I mean, that's a mathematical calculation for profit. How much, you know, how to get the most out of square meters. I mean, that's the calculation that these REITs, real estate investment trusts, do. Real estate investment trusts are just funds. It's stocks, basically. So it has nothing to do with housing, the provision of housing. It only has to do with dollar per square meter, and profits for a return on investment. I mean, it's a whole area that needs to be investigated. I had an interesting call recently with some representatives here in Canada, where I live, saying that they want to try to get cities to start buying more buildings that would otherwise become real estate investment trusts or part of real estate investment trusts. And I really applaud that effort. So in other words, you know, they would become public assets instead of these real estate investment trusts. And because COVID is going to result in a lot of foreclosures and big buildings coming up for sale, I totally support the move by cities to move in there where they can, or national level government, and purchase these assets and not let them become real estate investment trusts, unless they're real estate investment trusts for social good in some way, and that the returns on the REIT are for social good.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, as we filmed a lot in Canada, and the Canadian cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and others are filled with these kind of projects.
Yes.
From the real investment trust. Yeah. And we saw them also in New York City. And my general impression is that it's extremely poor architecture. They're built in a way so they could certainly be the slums of the future, because they don't really have the quality, so people don't really would like to stay. So there will be a constant turnover of people, which is normally means that it will go down.
Yeah.
So I can understand why somebody wants to build them and make that profit. I don't really get why cities accept them. And I'm a little bit shocked that the city of Malmö, which is also now a member of the Shift, the first city up here, accepted this. So I know you have a talk with the mayor of Malmö tomorrow. So
Yes.
please ask her.
I'm going to ask her
What
that
did
for
they
sure.
think?
Yeah. And what's the reason? And I mean, maybe there was resistance by the mayor, but maybe it was impossible for her to resist. And what are those barriers and challenges? Because sometimes cities need help. Sometimes cities are inviting these guys in and making this stuff happen. Sometimes they're trying to resist, but they can't for whatever reason. National legislation, pressures at the city level. So I'm very interested to speak with the mayor about that. But, we saw it also, Fredrik. I don't know if you remember or if you were with me in Santiago when we were filming in Chile. There they were building these massive, and they were like several blocks long buildings.
The biggest high-rise slum in the world, the one in Santiago. It's a huge social problem, and you can imagine that building now. I mean, I talked when I was in Chile now in February or March, and to present Push. The film was running on theaters in Chile when this stupid virus came and destroyed everything. No, but they have lines to the elevators. People are waiting for hours to get into the elevators, and you can imagine those buildings now under a lockdown with a threat of a virus.
Yeah,
it's like it's a prison.
Yeah,
it's a prison.
Exactly.
And so it's not the model to build a sustainable society.
No.
Even if you need to build for I mean, of course, cities have the challenge to build houses for people with less money. But I think there is something strange out there. I think the building costs are too high, and I think that is related to the power of the construction companies.
That's probably right. The other thing, I mean, Acalius would say to me, because they did respond to the media, they haven't responded formally to the UN, and if they do, I'm sure my successor will pick it up. But they responded to the media, and what they say is, look, we are refurbishing buildings that need to be refurbished. And, if you stop us from doing that, the buildings will fall down, and then there won't be any housing for low-income people. And I mean, my response to that is, like, first of all, I don't applaud people for doing what should be done under international human rights law. Maintaining buildings is what you have to do. When you buy a building, if it's not in good repair, you have to repair it. That's part of your human rights obligation. So I'm not going to applaud that behavior, but also you can't do that at the expense of the tenants. You have to maintain tenancies. People need a place to live. I'm not sure Acalius has ever answered the question, where do they think people will go once they can't afford Acalius units?
Crazy, complicated. How do we solve this? And there is actually Hannes writing to us here, I think from maybe Sweden or Denmark, asking, how do we defeat these greedy bastards? Do you have that answer?
Well, we're trying, aren't we? I think the film Push actually has a huge role to play. And I think, Fredrik, you're in the midst of trying to figure out how to make sure that we can continue to use Push to help defeat these greedy bastards, their words, not mine. But because first of all, there's a real lack of knowledge about this whole area. I mean, people just simply don't know. People still believe they have a landlord, which they don't. In so many cases, people don't have a normal, proper landlord. They have some corporate entity or they have a fund. So people need to know more before they can take action. And I think we need to try to get screenings of Push out there and allow people to have the conversation. I think, Fredrik, you and I have experienced that once people start talking about this stuff, they start realizing, oh shit, I'm not alone in this. This is not my singular problem. It's not because I'm a failure. This is a whole system and a whole structure. And from there, we can start making structural change. Of course, through the shift, our intention is to hold these actors accountable and to hold governments accountable, because governments can control this. They invited these guys in. They made the tax structures possible. They made the legislation possible. So governments have invited them in. Governments can push them out. And we saw this, another kind of pushing out, right? These guys should be pushed out. And we saw that in Denmark, right? Push was screened there. And I mean, well, maybe you can tell the story, Fredrik, of what happened.
That's an amazing story. I mean, I think overall, I started to ask you a question about housing as a human right. And I think that the success of your language and your work in combination with the film actually has made tenants and politicians and governments around the world use your language. Actually, housing is a human right.
Yeah.
And that shifts a lot the local debate. It's in one way a very simple step, but it's a very meaningful step. And in Denmark, a few weeks ago, they took a new legislation, and that legislation is now coming up. So it means basically a 5-year rent cap. It will be implemented now 1st of July. And they're also coming in now in the Danish relief packages. They're actually sending in a lot of money into renovating homes. The government will put money into that, and with a green ambition in it, to make it greener and safer and more sustainable.
Right.
So that's something you can do with your relief packages. And that's happening now in Denmark. In Germany, and especially in Berlin, there is also new legislation which also includes a 5-year rent cap. And actually, I got an email the other night with material from what people talk about inside Akelius in Germany. So they are actually companies like Akelius, Blackstone, and all these. They don't like that governments are moving in. Because then they think they have to move to other places where there are less protection.
Right.
So I think this is all of you listening out there. You should talk to your politicians and talk to your neighbors and to say, of course, housing is a human right, but we can also do something by making our governments move. I wouldn't say that the Swedish government has done it, because they are actually even looking into market rent. What do you think about market rent, my friend?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, Sweden's system is so interesting, where the tenants union negotiates rents, and it's quite unique. And to go there, a really interesting and good model, to a market rent-based model is the exact opposite direction that we should be moving. I mean, I've been saying that in this COVID time, when we don't know what the market is, there is no market, no one has any money. It's a perfect time to return to an understanding that housing has to be, the cost of housing, one's rent, should be commensurate with how much money you have. So you base rents on household income. You don't base it on what the market can bear. So obviously, I don't think market rent is the right move for Sweden. Definitely not. Yeah. I mean, not to say that you don't have expensive rents. You do have expensive rents. And of course, there's pressures on the tenant union the market pressures the tenant union in terms of what it's able to accomplish in terms of setting rents. But it's the opposite. Right now, we have a unique opportunity to rethink the cost of housing, the quality of housing, who should own housing, how it should be run, etc. So
I have a few more questions coming in here. Do you want?
Okay.
Are you ready? I will read it from the other computer here.
Yep.
So Tallene, I don't know where she's based, but she's in Toronto. Hi, Tallene. Many cities and greater levels of government are saying they are close to bankruptcy because of COVID.
Yes.
Is it possible this problem may get worse with greater reliance on private sector for dollars and selling off public land and assets? Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally concerned about that. And in the Canadian context, what many might not know is that unlike other levels of government, cities are not allowed to be in a deficit position. And so that puts them in a really precarious place where they could very well start resorting to selling off public assets in order to get money to run a city. And COVID has been felt most strongly by cities who are having to respond. Obviously, they are alongside housing, they're on the front lines of the COVID response. So I'm super concerned about that. I think national level governments have to step in and start bailing out cities. And that's not a bad thing. That's a positive thing. I think the idea of bailing out cities has been given some negative media attention, but I think it's absolutely necessary. Of course, that's how countries are run, through cities. So we can't have our cities all bankrupt, and we can't have further privatization. I mean, not in the housing area anyway.
Okay, there is more questions. We have one. Is Britta, who asks if it's possible to expropriate houses, and how do we do that? Yeah. That's like communism, isn't it? Yeah. It sounds like it's.
Well, I mean, expropriation happens all the time. So of course, expropriation could happen. It happens under other circumstances. Whether it's necessary is another thing. I mean, I think cities could exercise a right of first refusal, where that is when distressed assets or a building comes up for sale, for whatever reason, a city government or national level government should have the right to put a bid in first. And there could be some rules around that to allow governments to rebuild their public asset base because they've lost a lot through neoliberalism over the last 20 years. There's practically, cities and national governments have been selling things off. So it would be a way to accrue more public assets. That's being called for in, in fact, the mayor of Berlin bought back a building that was sold, social housing that had been sold. And so he actually bought it back at market value, whatever. But the Berliners who were taking to the streets, the tenants, they were saying that expropriation should happen, that Blackstone buildings should be expropriated, for example. Whether that has to happen, whether we have to resort to that, I don't know. That's a pretty extreme measure, but something has to happen. We have to protect tenants. That's the human right.
But it's kind of interesting. I mean, because expropriation is normally used by governments when they're building infrastructure, so new roads, railways, and so on. Then it's not a big thing, you do it in a proper way.
Yeah.
But isn't also housing, our homes, infrastructure in society?
Well, I think that's a good question. And generally they have not been considered infrastructure. And obviously COVID is telling us so many things. I mean, as horrible as it is and unfortunate as it is certainly telling us something. Housing is absolutely infrastructure and so is healthcare. We know that now. So, and there's big money in infrastructure. I mean, it's amazing what money cities can raise through the World Bank and other funds to and national level governments to build infrastructure. So surely we could raise money for housing.
I have one more here from Mahasti in Gothenburg, Sweden. I met her up in Gothenburg. She is an amazing local tenant activist in a tenant union up there. So hello dear, she says to me. That's nice. I wonder if you can ask Leilani to inform us a little bit about rent strike in other countries and who goes and how it goes and how it works. I mean, when we shot in Toronto a few years ago, we met rent strikers both from Toronto and in Hamilton. I've been seeing on social media with friends who are active in a rent strike in Sydney, in Australia. So obviously this is something that people are taking on.
Yes.
I don't know.
It's big in the US, quite big in the US. I don't know how it's going. I have to say that I haven't had updates on from May 1st, because that would have been the last rent strike. Obviously you do it on the 1st of the month when the rent is due. I have mixed feelings. I'm going to be really honest about the rent strike. I understand why people would call for a rent strike, and I support, in general, the movement. But I do think people should pay their rent if they can, and I think people should pay what they can. So generally the rule is, if you can pay 30% of your income on rent, and then you should have enough to live with the rest. Now, rents are so expensive, it's hard to know whether that's true anymore. And everything is so expensive, but I do think where people can pay, they should pay. So in that way, I'm a little bit rubbing against the rent strike, but I understand the idea of the movement and why it's deemed necessary. And government should be listening, because it's not this. It is a global thing, and people are saying we're in with being in lockdown for 1 or 2 months has put people in a position where they can't pay their rent, which suggests something. It suggests rents are too high and savings are too low, because incomes are flat and rents keep escalating.
Yeah, and I'm really scared actually now this new financial crisis coming out of the COVID crisis is that it's a big risk that the income inequality gap will grow even bigger.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something we all should look out for, because as I said, Blackstone were sitting on $160 billion dry powder to buy more. I actually saw that, they're looking into maybe buying into the Italian Serie A football league, Blackstone.
Right, I saw that.
An amazing NGO here in Sweden called Fair Finance Guy that checked our bank's ethical funds that you can save money in, and they found out that some of the ethical funds had shares in Blackstone doing agro business in Brazil, mainly meat and soya business out in Amazonas,
right,
where the forest is burning more than ever. So can you imagine that we want to put our small money to grow in an ethical way, and then they put it out to the vultures?
Yeah.
It makes me. When I saw the story, I went into my bank and I said, "Are you serious about this? Can you please tell me that this is not happening and get me out of this?" It's because we try to be ethical, we try to be good people, we try to be responsible, and then we have these monsters.
Yeah,
it makes me furious. Sorry.
Did the bank respond?
We're a little bit out of time because we've been talking for 40 minutes. I don't know if you... But there are some more questions, of course. There is a quick one. We have some regulars coming to the show, and it's Brent and Sonia in Vancouver.
Hi, Brent. Hi, Sonia.
And you have problem with a company called Corporate. I don't know anything about them. Can you say something short about them?
I think they're one of the largest real estate investment trusts in Canada, and they own a lot of units across the country and cities across Canada. I don't know much more about them. I've heard not great things, certainly from Brent, but from others as well, Brent and Sonia, and from others as well. It's the same model. So it's the same thing that we're running up against, which is, they're out for profits and returns on stock. And not truly landlords and housing providers in the way that we would like, and that's necessary for the right to housing to be enjoyed. So I'll keep my eye on them, Brent and Sonia, and let's see what we might do.
We have two more here. It's Sophia, who is in maybe north of Stockholm, and Leah in Toronto, and they kind of ask, how do you do when you meet political leaders? What is your best strategy to move them into understanding that housing is a human right? And Leah also asks, what is the most effective measure in terms of community organizing and in social advocacy?
Yeah.
Give some short.
Normally the best way to start a conversation is to try to get on a ground that you both agree on. I've never met a government that thought homelessness was a good thing. So normally we start there because it's such an obvious violation of so many human rights. And then from there, we get into the conversation. In terms of, and I find most governments actually quite receptive, especially city governments, because they are stressed everyone knows there's a global housing crisis. COVID has now made it even more obvious, but every government I met knows there's a crisis. So in that way, they're open to talking about it as a human right is more complicated because they don't want to be held accountable, and human rights is about accountability. In terms of organizing, I mean, there's all sorts of different things. I'm finding groups doing all manner of activities. Some are taking, you look at Berlin and in Spain and Barcelona, taking to the streets. Now it's very difficult, but taking to the streets and really making their demands known, drafting legislation that could be adopted by governments. That's been very effective in many places. Litigation in Nigeria, they've been very effective at preventing evictions using litigation. So it's really, there's so many different opportunities and ways. I use social media extensively, as most of you who follow me know, and I found that even quite effective if you just, you have to hammer it. So there's lots of strategies out there.
Okay, good. We have also Theo somewhere in Sweden who wants to know more about this Vonovia, who actually took over after Blackstone in Sweden. But I don't know if you should talk more about them because we don't have so much time. But I think that what you all should do is try. I mean, if you live now in a house bought by Vonovia in Sweden, which is now they have more than, I think, up to 50,000 units in Sweden after a very short time. But you should talk to tenants of Vonovia in Germany because they are already organized groups with a lot of experiences. So we should understand. You said before we talked, I'm so tired of the word landlord because these guys are not landlords. We should understand this is big finance with a landlord hat.
Yeah.
A hell of a difference. These guys are not in this because they love homes or houses. Mm-hmm. They have found an asset that they can grow money in. And whenever they don't think it's fun anymore, they will move on.
Yeah.
Into football, into soya in Amazonas, or into anything else. Don't expect Vonovia or Blackstone or any of these guys to stay in. And whenever this is not rentable, whenever they squeezed out what they can, they will move on. And we will be sitting there with a problem. So,
but what I think you said, Fredrik, is so important, the idea of linking between Sweden and Germany and wherever else Vonovia is, and creating this sort of understanding that this is a global thing. I think, and the idea of the shift is that these things are global, these structures are global, and the only way we're going to address them is if we name them as global and address them as global. The actors are global themselves. They're all multinational. So we have to adopt a similar strategy to push back. And you all can look in the future. I think the shift is going to be doing a global action on homelessness sometime soon. So you can look for that as a way of getting in on some of these issues, a different angle on some of these issues.
Yeah. I think we're running out of time. There are more questions coming in. There is a reminder from Berlin that you and I are going to be in a call in a talk called "Evicted by Greed." Mm-hmm. So in 2 weeks' time in Berlin, we were supposed to be in Berlin, but we will not be in Berlin.
No,
but we will be on another Zoom.
Yeah. So, plus, it's a very cool conference, the Evicted by Greed. I think maybe you can participate somehow through Zoom, but I think it's one of the first international activist conferences around financialization and housing. So it's super cool. I'm really happy to participate however I can electronically.
You just follow us on Push the Film on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You should also follow The Shift on all these channels. This talk we will put up on YouTube after this call. So if you hate Facebook and your friends do, you can go there and you can share it. And if your friends haven't seen the film, just click on one of our links and you will get to a place where you can see the film. And unfortunately, the film is not available in the UK and in the US yet, and in South America due to distribution problems, and distribution is now held up because of the stupid virus. So we are now in talks about how to release the film. I mean, in the UK it was already released, but it got stopped. In the US, we were supposed, you and I at this time were supposed to be touring around the US and talking about this issue. And hopefully it will happen soon. So, and if you're in the US or in the UK, write to us and we can find ways to organize screenings in a digital way. So please talk to us if you want to show the film for your group and so on. I mean, wherever you are on this planet, talk to us and help us to spread this story and this talk. And I think, Leilani, we should talk again, shouldn't we?
Always open to talking more and more.
Yeah.
The
So we
facts
should
are
be-
changing every day, actually, so it's good to keep talking.
So this was like our the pushback talk number 4. And so there will be pushback talk number 5 soon. And I already have things here that I didn't have time to look into.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would like to talk about the role of the tax havens, the role of the criminal money in our homes, and also this kind of what Saviano talked about in Push, the merge of legal capitalism and illegal capitalism in a tax haven, which also affects our cities big time. And that has also relation to the relief packages, because the relief packages that are going out from governments right now can easily be also hijacked by these criminal entities and hijacked by companies who's done everything to avoid paying taxes. And now they want help from taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
That's what we should talk about next time, maybe.
All right, you're on.
So
You're on.
please, this is our call. Send more hearts, share this talk with your friends, and don't give up, because we can always push back. See you.
Bye.
See you, Leilani.
Thanks.